Okay, guys, today's lecture is about social psychology and how it relates to religion. I have a PhD in social psychology. I also teach a class in it, but that's a whole nother class. I want to just give a few little things, tidbits from social psychology and explain these theories, and then we're going to relate them to religion. So here we go. I got some quotes to start off with. Napoleon Bonaparte says this right here: religion is excellent stuff for keeping common people quiet. I love Karl Marx, but he says religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature. It is the opium of the people, so it sedates people, keeps people quiet. And I don't know if y'all like the Book of Eli, but I love the Book of Eli because there's this duality going on in it. But Gary Oldman's character is different than Denzel, who wants, the purity of religion. And Gary Oldman says it's a weapon aimed right at the hearts and minds of the weak and desperate, the Bible. And so you can see, this angle that I've kind of started off with. And so social psychology is all about conformity and deviance and peer pressure and how do you succumb to the group. Now, I talk a lot about the tribe in my other classes. I could talk about flocks or herds, but tribe seems most appropriate for people. And this is what Nietzsche says about the tribe. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. And it's like if you try, you're going to be lonely sometimes, but no price is too high for the privilege of owning yourself. So this is why I'm a social psychologist. I've always kind of been a misfit for the tribe. And if you think about Jonathan, your project, Jonathan is this misfit who has to struggle to keep himself from being overwhelmed. Now, groups then exert this drive for uniformity. All need to be the same. So for your project, John, why can't you just be like the other birds and fly around, eat fish, and come back here and squabble around like the rest of us do? And so this uniformity can manifest in many forms: our thoughts, our feelings, our behavior. Now, if we were in my other class, I'd go into this in more detail, but if you're not uniform, the bad things start to happen. But let me get back into uniformity for a minute before I go into when things go off the rails. Okay, so Bib Latine, multiplication of impact. What does this mean? Well, this is one of the early theories in social psychology that I use, is that when a group gets bigger and bigger, they exert or multiply their impact on one individual. So the more people, the more pressure they exert on a person. Okay, so smaller groups don't exert so much pressure on me, but bigger groups exert more pressure. That makes sense. Now, the flip side of his theory, which I like a little bit better, is the division of impact. That as the group grows, I have less and less impact on each individual member. So if you get a great big crowd, I can't control a big crowd as much as I can a small crowd. Now, this is not always true. Adolf Hitler, or you think about cult leaders, especially maybe for your projects and stuff. But sometimes the crowd gets so big that their message gets diminished across the crowd, or division of impact. Okay, and so they did these research with Billy Graham. Here he is right here. I don't know if you know Billy Graham, but they would follow him around, and what they would find is that he was more effective in smaller crowds than bigger crowds. How did they measure effectiveness? Well, what percentage of the crowd came down afterwards to give their life to Christ? In bigger crowds, a smaller percentage would come down. Now, some of that could be fear, other factors, but the idea is when you have a smaller crowd, it feels more intimate that the preacher is preaching right at you. This is why I like teaching at SCC. Okay, so Deutsch and Girard talk about two reasons we conform. One is normative influence. I should take that off of there. There. And that's called compliance sometimes. Like you have to wear your uniform at work, or you have to drive the speed limit, whatever it is. You just like obey, maybe not obey, but you obey. Why? Because you don't want to get in trouble. So I call this phony conformity. You're just pretending to go along with the group so you blend in or you fit in. Okay, so informational influence is very important for this class, and I don't know if I can get this on here. Internalization, that means you truly, oops, I don't have my pen on here, you truly believe. Okay, so when it comes to going to church, are you shallow? This goes back to Gordon Allport. Are you deep? You truly believe, right? You really believe what the group is selling, what the hive is selling. If you think about your projects, most of it is internalization, not just, well, I'm just faking it so I don't get in trouble. Some of it is that. Okay, so I usually use Adolf Hitler as an example because in Nazi Germany, a lot of people were faking it. So this is the fake one, right? Because they didn't want to get in trouble, even though they didn't believe in what the party was selling. Other people were really truly believing because they really believed what Adolf Hitler, Mein Kampf, the Third Reich had to offer. Okay, so another theory that comes into play. Hopefully that first theory from Bib Latin made sense. More people, more pressure. More people, I have less influence on each one of them. Okay, so rejection of the deviant is what Schachter started to find. Is that when people don't go along, right here, they stick out, they're a black sheep, that we reject them in a number of different ways. Now, rejection can take all kinds of forms, but one of the ways that we reject them is verbal abuse. We can diss people, or we can hurt them, or we can kill them, right? And one form of verbal abuse is not really verbal because people ghosting you. They just don't talk to you, right? They snub you. So there's all these different kinds of form of rejection I could get into, but when it comes to religion class, think about the fact that we already have names in religion, here in Christianity or Muslim traditions, heretic, infidel, I could talk about goy, when it comes to like Gentiles. It's like, so anybody that's different, well, here they're going to stone them to death, right? So there's consequences for being different. Now, in the Spanish Inquisition, which I never knew the exact range of days, but from the 1400s almost to the middle of the 1800s it lasted. So this is the only thing I want you to remember for the test. For almost 350 years, the people were persecuted for being different. And they were persecuted by the church. So if you were different, you just didn't get rejected like, hey, get out of here, we don't want you coming to church here anymore. There was a lot more serious consequences. Now, since it was called the Spanish Inquisition, I'm not going to ask you on this test, but this is Isabella and Ferdinand of Aragon. And these two are Aragon, I should say. Aragorn is Lord of the Rings. But these two went to the Pope and got his permission to start, this Inquisition process, which eventually led to, the torture. Here's early waterboarding right here. This is the rack. They would pull you out of joint by like yanking on this real hard right here. Other instruments, the Iron Maiden, they put you in here and close it in on you. This is the thumb crushers or finger crushers. They put your fingers in here. And this is the most evil one, pair of anguish. Like if you are a blasphemer, they put you in your mouth. Or if you were gay or you're a woman, they would put it somewhere else. And like they would torture you in these ways. And this is the church in the name of Jesus. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so this is the part of the church that has a bad history. Okay, so if you really think about it, one time I had a cross on, I was talking to this girl who was Mormon, and she goes, we don't wear crosses. Like, why not? And she goes, because that's like wearing an electric chair around your neck. Because the cross, I was just rewatching The Passion of the Cross last night, the cross is the sign of, hey, you get out of the line, boy, we got something for you. It's not just about Jesus, it's about anybody rolling into Rome. There's a bunch of people out there like suffering on crosses. And so the cross, we, venerate it, but the cross really has to do with the rejection of the deviant. This is what happens to deviants, not just Jesus, but other deviants. There were two other thieves on either side of them, and they weren't the first three people to ever be crucified by the Romans. Okay, and so this crucifixion, this ultimate rejection of the deviant had to happen as far as Christian theology is concerned. Okay, this next section is on dissonance. Cognitive dissonance theory is one of my favorite theories and one of the biggest theories ever introduced in social psychology. So Leon Festinger in 1957, it's not like he invented anything new. Basically what he said is that agreement is rewarding. And if people agree with me, what it does is it promotes harmony. So I usually relate this to relationships. If your girlfriend or boyfriend agrees with you, then that's nice. But if they disagree with you, disagreement or conflict is painful because it causes anxiety, stress, fighting, whatever you want to call it down here. And we want to avoid that. Now, I don't like conflict, so sometimes, I'm avoiding conflict, and that doesn't always end up well. But we'll come back to this, theme again and again, that people like to be in harmony and they don't like conflict. Now, one that can conflict us is when we're at war with ourselves. Let me get my pen on here. When one of our attitudes don't match the other one. Let's just say you're in a relationship and you know you shouldn't be in it, but you kind of want to be in it because you love her, but she does all this stuff you know it's not good, but you love her, so you're conflicted, right? And so now you have these two different attitudes. I love her, but she's not good for me, and it's like this, that, and the other. That causes a lot of stress. Take it from me. I've been there a bunch of times. What if we relate this back to religion class? I have this little Jesus down here. When I was real young, like people were saying, "Oh no, Jesus is the only way. I am the way." John 14:6. But I kind of believe Jesus is one of many ways. I know that's blasphemous. And so this was a duality within myself. It's like, this way, that way. It's like, well, I just have to say, no, he's not the only way. But I don't know if you have this duality within yourself, if you have these conflicting attitudes about your religion. Okay, so the whole idea that Leon Festinger had, sorry about that, is that we want to get rid of dissonance. How do we get rid of this unharmonious situation? So not only do we have this need to get rid of dissonance within ourselves, but also within the groups we're in. Think about hives, in your project, or the flock. The flock wants to promote harmony. It doesn't want to have a lot of dissonance within the flock. And so this has a lot to do with Jonathan and how he relates to the breakfast. So how can you reduce dissonance? If you're looking for, a theory to use in Jonathan, this would be a great one. But one of the things you can do is to change your mind. If you don't believe the same thing that these bees over here believe, you can just say, okay, I'll switch and believe what they believe. Now there's no dissonance because, like, I'm in the hive, I've changed my mind, I've converted, I believe what they believe, everything's hunky-dory. Now, doesn't Jonathan try to do that? He tries to act like the other birds for a while, right? Now, the second thing I can do is try to change the hive and convince these bees over here. It's like, look, y'all are wrong, and I found this new way. Jonathan does this too, right? And then thirdly, you can just leave the hive and say, well, I don't fit into that hive. It causes a lot of dissonance. Every time I'm around them, we get into a fight. Therefore, I'm going to go to a different kind of hive. That's me and my family. It's hard, but it's just like, I've just got to go to a different kind of hive. I don't want to fight with them. Okay, so religion definitely, and maybe I should say corporate religion, has a lot to do with dissonance, at least the religions I grew up in, because you have this concept of sins. Now, we already mentioned where sin comes from. Sin is just to miss the target when you're shooting an arrow in archery, but it's laden with this negativity or this kind of grimy, undertone. And so we have codes in religion, sorry to pick on Judeo-Christianity, but the Ten Commandments. And we don't live up to the code, so that causes us dissonance or guilt, whatever you want to use for the word. We don't want to have that. So we want to rid ourselves of this dissonance. And we call this hypocrisy, right? Our attitudes don't match our behavior. We're phony. We've messed up. I mean, I'm there a lot of the times. And so the church has a way, especially if I pick on Catholicism, which I'm a Catholic, of getting rid of this, right? Confession, reconciliation, atonement, repentance, these different things, say 5 Hail Marys, whatever it is, you know what I mean, to rid yourself of the duality. Now, if I put my atheist hat on for a minute, I was going to talk about the Hegelian dialectic, but you don't have to remember this for the test. In marketing, I don't know if you've seen this movie, but what you do, if you're going to be a good marketer, is you get on TV with your commercial and you get people scared. And so you've got this problem and you've got to solve it. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? now that if you scared your customer, it's like, oh my God, now they're freaking out. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And then on your commercial, you come by after you've scared people and say, but we have the solution. So now the 1-2 punch is I'm going to scare you, and then I'm going to come offer the solution for the thing I scared you about, but you wouldn't be scared if you hadn't watched my commercial in the first place. I hope you follow the logic of the Hegelian dialectic, because it's a real mindfuck. So in the church's thing is they give you the problem. What's the problem? You're going to do all these bad things and you should feel guilty about it, right? And then when you feel guilty about it, you're going to want some medicine. Sorry, my little bottle of pills came off. And it's like, oh my God, I feel so bad. It's like, where do I go? I go right back to the people that gave me the problem. The Hegelian dialectic. Now, I know I'm being dark, but fear-based religion is this. We wouldn't be afraid and guilty and scared if we hadn't got the problem right here. But that's the same place, the same store that you have to go back to shop for the relief. Okay, enough about that. Okay, so one last thing on this dissonance and spirituality. But then I'm going to talk about conversion, and that's everything for today's lecture. We've talked about the jihad so much in this class. The jihad is dissonance. By definition, jihada, to struggle. And I try to struggle to be a better person. It's weird that I'm giving this lecture today because Easter was yesterday and I feel so alone. But in part of the jihad, the spiritual part of me wants to be the good part, right here, and this white part up here. Get that up there. But I've got this black dot right here. And it's like, that's the not spiritual part of me. That's the carnal part of me that wants to do the bad stuff. And so I have this duality between the spirit and the flesh. The spirit and the flesh. Carne, me, right? And so I use the chakras because if you look at the first 3 chakras down here, you're by the serpent, the flesh. And if I get into those first 3 chakras, I would vibrate real heavy because I'm close to the ground. But if I get above heart chakra's in the middle up towards crown, then I'm in the rainbow. The Serpent and the Rainbow was a movie, but if I'm on the serpent, I'm on the devil's ground, earthly. And if I'm up here, I'm heavenly. And so I have this duality that goes on with me as far as my battle between flesh and spirit. Do I do what God wants me to or the devil wants me to? The flesh feels good, right? And so that duality to me has to be a part of your spiritual jihad. I don't care what your denomination or religion is. Okay, so this is the last few slides. They're about spiritual conversion. Why do I have this picture on here? Because this is Saul. If I could try to write neatly. And then he changed his name to Paul after he was blinded on the road to Damascus. He used to be an evil man as Saul and persecute people that were of God. And then as Paul, well, he wrote most of the New Testament and carried the message all kinds of places. And so maybe you didn't have this sudden kind of awakening. I did. If I was in class, I would go into it. I had a sudden awakening, where I changed, but it could be the educational variety that they talk about in AA, that it takes a while for you to convert. Okay, so Daniel Batson has 4 different steps in his model of conversion. I meant to stage this, but first of all, existential crisis. What does that mean? You have to have a oh shit, come to Jesus moment. It's like, oh my God, it's like I almost died in Peru, got the shit beaten out of me. It's like I could go into detail about it, but I've had a lot of these moments where it's like, okay, boy, wake up. And the second thing is surrender of self-will, that somehow what I'm doing is not working. Again, it's weird that I'm giving this lecture right now. And then, as a function of these 2 things, having an oh shit moment and that I'm just I can't work my life out right, that I have to surrender also to like this new kind of way of living. So part of that is I have the vision of the new way of life, the solution. There is a solution if you're an AA, and then I get a new life. And so why I keep mentioning AA, even though I'm not in AA anymore, because like whatever, I use medical marijuana. But if I talk about AA, there's a lot of good things about it. But one of the things is you have a oh shit moment, right? And then the second thing is it's like, oh, I can't run my life. And then see these right here is new vision. And this right here, oh yeah, now I have a new way of life. Right? And so they use this kind of model. Not only does AA use it, but a lot of other people use it as well. Okay, one last thing to mention if you want to do an extra credit movie. I love this movie. It's so great. But one of the reasons I mention is because Robert De Niro was a conquistador and he lived by the flesh, by the sword. And then he has this spiritual awakening where he has to do this penance to, whatever, atone for all that fleshly stuff that he did. And then he meets Jeremy Irons, who's a priest, and it's all about, his battle between spirituality and the flesh and that duality or that dissonance that I mentioned before. I hope you liked today's lecture. If you have any questions, once again, call me or email me. I'll see you next time.